Okay. So, having covered the style elements, we next go into those things which actually appear in your paper. First is the title. So, title of the paper should not be too long, but it should reflect correctly the theme of the paper, including the contribution as well as limitations. So, what the paper does and about what kind of things it does so, this much should appear clearly in the title. The idea is that whatever is being reported in the paper, some idea of that should appear in the title. On the other hand, if the paper has a limited domain of application, then that limitation also should appear in the title itself. For example, if you are reporting the solution of Navier-Stokes equations for axisymmetric flows, then that term axisymmetric flows should appear in the title. Otherwise, you will be giving the wrong impression to the reader that you are solving Navier-Stokes equation in all cases, which is not true. Okay. So, after title, authors and their affiliations. So, in the case of a single author, just the author's name will come. If it is two authors, then first author and second author. If there are more authors, then after each author's name there should be comma, and finally, the last and the penultimate one will have an and in between. And below every author, one can include the affiliation and address, including email, or some styles require that here only the names come, and then with a footnote mark or superscript numeric, you can put these address details, affiliation details in the footnote. Okay. So, this style is a part of many journals and conference proceedings where you are likely to send your papers. Okay. So, after title and authors, then you have one of the most important things of the paper, that is abstract. And you should know very well what should go in the abstract and what should not. Abstract typically should be short, crisp. So, it should typically be one paragraph, at most two if it is really necessary. And abstract should very clearly outline the purpose and theme of the paper, the central idea of this particular paper, the specific breakthrough or achievement achieved through this work, and some comment on its utility and value. Okay. Now, through the abstract, you try to attract a potential reader with the exact expectation from the complete paper. So, what the complete paper will give the reader, so a sense of that, a gist of that should appear in the abstract. So, that reading the abstract, the correct audience gets attracted to the complete paper. And there are a few things which you should avoid. Too much details you have to avoid, because you are making the entire abstract short. So, details you have to avoid, and the claims that you make regarding the breakthrough and achievement, you should make no claim which is higher than what this paper really achieves. Okay. And citations, I would advise you to avoid in the abstract to the extent possible. Citations will come in the body of the paper in normal course of the progress of the paper, but in the abstract there is typically no need to cite anything. Okay. In very exceptional circumstances, if some other paper is very intimately connected to this, then once in a while there are citations in abstract. For example, if you read 100 papers, then chances are that perhaps at most one will have a citation in the abstract. Typically, it is not there. And one important advice is that do not try to write the abstract in the beginning, though it appears near the top of the paper, because before you write the paper, you will not be in a position to write a good abstract. So, typically after you have finished the entire paper and you know already very clearly what is there in the paper, then you should write the abstract. And once you draft it, then several times you need to revise and improve it, because abstract is something which catches the eye of the potential reader in the beginning. After abstract, before the start of the body of the paper, there are two more things that might come. One of them will certainly come. Keywords are now an essential feature of any paper. Okay? There was a time when keywords were not so important, but with the advent of digital access, keywords have become very important for technical papers. Okay? So, it is important for potential readers, because when a reader searches literature through Web of Science or Google Scholar or Scopus or anything, the words that he puts through that, a search is made. With the help of those words, the search is made. Okay? So, if those terms appear in the list of your keywords, then the possibility is high that your paper will be listed in the results of that particular search. So, it is important for potential readers, more important for the editor in identifying appropriate reviewer. For example, when you send your paper manuscript to the journal, you typically send it to the editor, and once the editor gets it, the first job of the editor is to send it for review to 2 or 3 referees. Now, who will be a good referee for this particular paper? The editor will decide that partly by these keywords. Okay? And the keywords are most important for indexing purposes, to make it available to future search by anybody in the world. Okay? One example of the list of keywords for some potential paper. There are many such papers for which these are perhaps valid set of keywords. Multi-body dynamics, and notice that this whole thing is considered one keyword. This is not 3 words, 3 keywords. Of course, there are 3 words you see, but together they make one keyword. Then Euler-Lagrange equations, this is another keyword. Holonomic constraints is another keyword, and this whole thing is another keyword. So, typically 4 keywords are enough for any paper. Some papers will have 5, some people may have 3 for that matter, but 3 will look very less. Okay? And the way to supply the keywords is this. That is, one keyword you put in its entirety, whatever number of words it might require, then put a semicolon. Similarly, another, then another semicolon, and so on. Finally, it ends with a full stop. Okay? Keywords is an essential feature of a paper, but the next one, nomenclature, is not essential. Okay? Nomenclature or a list of symbols. If it is needed, you put it. If it is not needed, then you omit it. Okay? And when you put it, what to put there inside nomenclature? So, you list out all the important symbols and their meanings as a list or as a table, which will appear in the paper in several places. Okay? So, that suppose it is a 20-page paper, then while reading through page 7 or page 17, at several places if symbols appear, then the reader, if he is confused in between somewhere, then this is one place where he can quickly check what does this symbol mean. Okay? Now, there are some papers in which lots and lots of symbols are used. Many of them are used throughout the paper, and some have extremely local utility. So, those symbols which are of extremely local utility, they need not always appear in the nomenclature, unless the nomenclature is not very small. So, extremely local symbols can be explained in the context itself, and this entire item of nomenclature even may not be there in the paper if the list of if the symbols are not too many. Okay? So, if you do not put a nomenclature, then every symbol should be explained, should be defined wherever it is appearing first time. Okay? So, from this stage, from these topics that we have just now discussed, before we go into the actual body of the paper, if you have any questions, you can ask, and we can settle these things before we go to the actual body of the paper.
Hello sir, thank you. But you were suggesting that abstract should not be written in at first. That is understood, but although it is the first item appearing in the paper. Then that means that perhaps we will start from introduction or some such things. But is it not a good idea that if we have some rough form of abstract in the beginning and we start writing, and as we go on and finish the paper, we can, at the end of the paper, we can modify the abstract? Is it a very bad idea?
I would not say that it is a very bad idea. One can do it, but only in such situations you can do it when you actually have a very crisp idea of what will appear in the paper. But what happens quite often, while people start drafting the paper, in between they think up a lot of other things, and some additional items come into picture, some things get removed and so on. So, that way, yes, you are right in telling that even if you have a basic draft of the abstract to begin with, later you might have to go through it very carefully and very thoroughly, to the extent that it might turn out to be almost equivalent to a redrafting, which is not a problem. It can be done always. Anything else? Okay. So, now we go into the actual body of the paper. The first section, introduction. Typically that is named introduction, okay, but that is not necessary. Okay. So, in those styles in which sections are numbered, this would appear as 1, and then the title of the section, that is 1 introduction or 1 something else, if the title is something else. There are some styles in which sections are not numbered. In that case, the section, subsection, etc. are differentiated mostly by the font size and font type and capitalization. Okay. So, there are different systems of capitalization for different sectioning environments. Okay. So, typically we will assume in this exposition that the sections are numbered. So, that is why 1, 2, etc. will appear typically. Okay. So, introduction, as I told you, is one of the most important sections. Why most important? Because writing this is very difficult. So, some authors actually strategize that even the introduction they write after section 2, 3, 4, 5 are already done. Okay. So, what appears in the introduction and in what order? This is important. First, you write a small paragraph introducing what this paper is about in reasonably general terms, which even a layman can understand. Okay. And then you spend 1 or 2 more paragraphs on the details of issues that got raised in very general terms here. Okay. And through these 1 or more paragraphs, you are actually addressing, you have started addressing the focused audience, okay, who will get more details of the issues which were raised here. And after that, by this time a lot of issues have been raised, okay, in explaining the details. Now, next few paragraphs will be dedicated to a general review of literature in the field, which addresses these things and several other related things. And in this literature review that appears here, you will put special emphasis and special coverage to those aspects which are important for this particular paper which you are writing. Okay. And while drafting this literature review part of it, it is important to use your own evaluation of the papers that you are citing, that you are referring to. Okay. So, it is important because sometimes it happens that the authors make some claim which, if you verbatim reproduce in your paper, then you might be making some wrong statement which is not really correct. Those original authors might have made those statements in the context of something which may be valid or may not be valid, but out of context, if you lift one sentence of it almost, that is, if the authors say that this have been achieved in this paper, then you say that these authors have achieved this thing just verbatim, then that may not be correct. Okay? And it is also important to be cautious that some authors make claims in their papers which are slightly on the higher or more ambitious side, and there is absolutely no reason why you need to endorse that high evaluation. Okay? So, you use your own critical evaluation of the paper and firmly but nicely put it there. Okay? And certainly do not lift lines from their papers. Not only that, it might be wrong in two counts. First, on the count of truth, and the second because of the count of plagiarism. Okay? So, do not do that, and you should use standard or absolute terms. For example, if some authors have used Euler-Lagrange formulation, you can write that these authors in this paper have used Euler-Lagrange formulation to formulate the dynamics of such and such system. On the other hand, because Euler-Lagrange formulation is something standard, okay? Textbooks have it, everybody knows it, everybody in the field knows it. On the other hand, if the author uses a very special thing which only some research communities are aware of, for example, the technique of natural orthogonal complement or the bond graph technique, which are specific, which many others do not know. Okay? So, it will be important to refrain from using such specific terms which are not well known in the scientific community. So, any term that appears in typical textbooks you can freely use, because your reader is supposed to know that, but any term which appears in just one or two authors' work, one group's works, typically it is not a good idea to use that, because your reader will not understand that. Maybe the reader of those original papers understood it, because those authors spent 1.5 pages in explaining that. You are not doing that, so you will not be able to take the message to your readers. So, this is why it is better to use absolute or standard terms corresponding to whatever the authors are really using, whatever you want to say. And you need to be critical in your comments, in your appraisal of the works that you are covering, but you should be fair. Okay? In particular, you should not be too critical. You should not take a tone of scolding the authors of those papers, right? Okay. And of course, whatever you do, never take the published papers at face value. You have to understand it properly and appropriately write your comments on it. And that is one reason why you need to take enough time to actually understand those papers which you are covering here. Okay? After covering the literature in the field, while on the way emphasizing on those aspects which are subject matter of this particular paper, you take a few more paragraphs to particularly identify gaps in the existing literature, in the state of the art. Okay? And while you identify gaps, the work that you are reporting in this particular paper looks like really needed. Okay? And that is important. So, as you see, any research that you are going to do today and you are reporting in a paper, that does not stand in a vacuum. You are at all doing that research because you have come to know some background material of that field in general. So, on that background field, you are writing your paper. So, that means humanity knows a lot of things and it does not know a lot of things. Okay. So, whatever humanity knows in the context of this problem, that is the existing literature, and whatever in between that entire continuum of knowledge humanity does not know, they form those gaps. Most probably through this paper you are addressing one or two of such gaps, okay, in order to complete the human knowledge in this particular field. So, through these paragraphs, which are very crucial, you try to identify those gaps. In some of those gaps, your present work will fit. So, by this exercise, you will be actually motivating the research idea that you are going to present in this particular paper. And now, you are going to tell that in one small, crisp, clear paragraph that this is the exact thing that you are reporting in this particular paper. Okay? And now, this is reported, now this is put down in more concrete terms than what the first paragraph did. First paragraph also in a way did that, abstract also for that matter in a way did that. Now, here it is put in more concrete, more clear cut manner that this is what we are setting out to do. Okay. After that, this is an optional little paragraph. You can say what appears in the following sections. Okay. If you have very little space, then you might omit that. Okay. And all these things that we are talking about, one paragraph and two paragraphs and several paragraphs and a few more paragraphs. Now, this entire paragraph structure outlined above is actually flexible. I mean, somewhere I have said one paragraph that might be put in two paragraphs if the authors feel that is more appropriate and so on. But whenever you are talking about paragraph structure, you should have a sense of how you structure the paragraphs in your entire document. So, this is not the place to, or this is not the context to discuss paragraph structuring strategies and techniques of any document, but I can point out certain basic features. In any document or part of a document, the paragraph has two aspects. Okay? One is its subject, its theme, and the other is its size. Typically, a paragraph should not be too long. For example, a large 1.5 page paragraph is not a great idea, though it is possible. Okay? So, but then size is not the prime important thing. Most important thing is the subject matter, theme. So, after you have drafted your document or part of a document, then for every paragraph that came while you were drafting, for every paragraph you ask yourself, what is the subject matter of this particular paragraph? What is the theme of this paragraph? If possible, you try to assign some sort of a theme title to every paragraph, note it down in the margin. Now, for every paragraph that you have drafted, if you can assign such a theme, such a title consistently, and then by tracing through those theme titles, if you can follow the progress of your exposition, then your paragraph structuring is all right. If it is not so, if you feel that some theme title which you are going to give to one particular paragraph, that same theme is also handled in another adjoining paragraph. On the other hand, that is not the only theme that is handled in this paragraph. This paragraph has another business to do. If you get this kind of feelings, then that means your current paragraph structuring is not appropriate. So, you ask, this is a checklist. What does this paragraph deal with? And when you answer these properly for every paragraph, then the next thing that you should ask, what is the succession of items, issues, aspects my document should have at this stage. So, if those succession of issues that is appearing in the theme titles paragraph by paragraph, then your paragraph structuring is all right. Okay. So, this is the introduction, and after introduction the other sections start appearing. So, now onwards you name your sections the way you think proper. First one also you could name as you thought proper, but quite often the first one is typically named introduction, though not necessary. Okay. So, in how many sections your paper should be divided, in what order those sections will come, what should be the nature of those sections, these are actually your judgment. Okay. So, of course, more basic things should appear first, and then other things which stand on the shoulders of these will come later, and so on. That of course you follow, but then say for example, your paper is about modeling of something. So, it is not necessary to give basic background in one section, and then mathematical formulation in another section, and then implementation details in another section, and then results and discussion in another section. It is not necessary. If your paper actually covers several cases, then you can also do the sectioning according to this kind of case, and then that kind of case, and that kind of case. And in the section dedicated to one particular kind of case, you can cover the whole thing, including even results. Finally, you will put a overall discussion. Okay. So, how you do the sectioning should be decided by you according to what you think will take your entire message most efficiently and most effectively to the mind of the reader. Okay. And your own take on how this whole thing should be served, illustrated. So, now size is not a binding limitation of any section. What should go in that section and what should go in another section, that typically does not need to be decided based on its size. Nobody can say that every section will be 3 pages. Okay. That is meaningless talk. There may be a section which is just 1.5 page, there may be a section which is 7 pages long. Okay. But typically, you will follow a rough idea that no section should be too large. Okay. Or just half a page section typically would not satisfy you. It will look like as if the section started and then just got over. Okay. Nothing was communicated in that section. So, it should typically not be too large or too small, some balanced size, but in that balanced size there may be a lot of variation. If you find that in a 20-page paper of yours, one section is trying to become 12 page long, then you will feel that it is too long. Okay. Then what to do? Now, sections have some subject matter. Okay. Now, if you feel that that subject matter really needs 12 pages out of total 20, then you should start thinking whether that subject matter can be broken into say 3 pieces which can form subject matters which are 3 page long, 5 page long, 4 page long, or some such thing. Okay. Sometimes that is possible. In that case, appropriately you break a section into 3, and then 3 or 2 or whatever it is, and then appropriately deal with them. The section titles are new. The original old section title may not appear as any one of them. Okay. And then you continue. Sometimes that is not possible. Sometimes you do need to cover the entire material within a single section. Then you will have subsections, which are the logical divisions of a section itself. And if the section is numbered as 2, then the corresponding subsections inside should be 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, and so on. If the style does not allow you to put numbers for sections, then obviously subsections also will have no number. And the font size, font type, and capitalization style will illustrate, will show what is a section and what is a subsection. Typically, it is possible that section title appears in a little bigger font compared to that subsection title is a little smaller. The section title may be appearing bold, this one may be italics. In the section title, the capitalization rule might be like this, where this T is capital, this P is capital, and in the subsection maybe only this T is capital and this S and this S are small. So, through these things, visually as well as logically, the reader will always be reminded what is a subsection, what is a section. But of course, it always remains convenient for author and reader alike if the sections and subsections are numbered. okay, but you cannot dictate the journal style, so you follow it. Okay. And after that, there will be several sections. How many? Nobody knows. So, this number 8 is just under the assumption that this particular paper which we are writing currently has 9 sections. Okay. Now, towards the end of the paper, there might be a large important section in which you present your results and discuss those results. Okay. Now, you see this results and discussion I have put here, but I have also said or something similar, because the title of the section need not be results and discussion. Okay. And for that matter, results and discussion need not be covered in a single section. Results may be spread over 3 sections. Okay. So, for example, you might say that results on planar systems, then you say results of spatial systems, and then you might say results on hyperspatial systems, if there is any such thing in your subject matter, okay, or results on singular systems, whatever it is. Okay. So, results and discussion also can be spread over several sections. Okay. So, what should go in the results and discussion section and in what manner? So, first thing, the first item listed here actually talks not only about reporting of the work, but also the conduct of the work, because it says take a lot of care to select and present results. The moment we talk about selecting some results of yours to present, that means that you have actually a larger set from which you are selecting some, and this is actually very important. I find many authors who, to begin with, decide that the typical length of the paper will allow them to present only 4 sets of results. So, only 4 sets of study they conduct, and those 4 results they will present. This is no way to do research. Okay. The number of studies that you conduct should be dictated by when do you feel that you have got enough truth, enough fact, enough new knowledge, new conclusions. Okay. So, with which you feel satisfied that you now know enough to be able to tell others. So, for example, in a particular situation, suppose you have got 20 sets of results in your hand, perhaps you conducted 28 studies, but 8 of them did not give you any sensible results, and 20 sets of results you have in hand. Now, you figure out of these 20 sets of results, which 4 or 5 to take and in what order to present in the paper. Okay. So, spend some time in carefully ordering and sequencing different cases. For example, the first one you might give a very simple case, okay, which most of your readers will quickly appreciate. Okay. So, they will feel nice about it. Yes, 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 yes. Okay. The surprises you should start giving after a while. Then you report 1 or 2 cases in which you show aspects for which this work is actually important. Okay. So, where this work really accomplishes the task of doing the thing for which you set out in the beginning, okay, through which you will convince the reader that you are really successful in doing what was promised in the beginning, in the abstract and in the introduction. Okay. So, and then towards the end you list out, you show, you expose the tricky cases, difficult cases, and if you have success to report in even those cases, then you claim special credit out of that. And if you find that your method does not work in some cases and how it gets stuck, so those things should come at the end. These are typical tricky cases or singular cases or more advanced cases which will break new avenues for further research. Okay. And all through this discussion, all through this exposition, whatever results you put in your paper, you should discuss them sufficiently, so that even a layman understands it clearly. So, you should present results in a manner that a newcomer into the field can appreciate their importance. You typically should not write for an expert. You typically should write for the newcomer in the field, because he is, your intellectual heir, who will inherit your work and who will proceed forward for the furtherance of human knowledge. So, he should appreciate what is this work that you are reporting, what that he is reading, only then he can further it. Okay? So, and another thing is that, first of all, your reader is most probably a newcomer in the field, and second, that he is not even enough attentive. He is reading it casually. Why I am assuming that? Because you cannot dictate with how much attention your reader is reading. Now, even through a casual reading, if the layman reader can appreciate the value, then only most probably he will read it once more to understand it clearly. Okay? So, even if he is not very attentive, he should not miss your message. Okay? Because if he misses your message, then it is not only a loss for him, it is a loss for you also, because in a way you actually lost some market. Okay? Because you were writing to begin with for your readers who will read it and understand and do something on it. Right? If that goal, if that target is missed because of somebody else's lack of attention, it is very sad for you also. Okay? So, that is why you should present results in as lucid a manner as possible. So, and you have to be particularly careful, because the bane is that you know too much. Okay? You know too much about this particular problem, this particular field, and this particular work. Okay? There is a possibility that you end up writing in a style, in a manner in which somebody else who knows this much only can understand, and it will be very difficult to get such readers. Okay? So, the reader, the typical reader, is novice in the field. He does not know so much as you know. Okay? He cannot have your background, because you have spent quite a bit of concentrated time in producing this work. Okay? So, that is why you need to use redundancy of information. So, maybe giving only the table of results is not enough. You need to explain the table in the text of your paper, what the entries in that table mean. Okay? Now, if there is a figure, then just showing the figure, the plot as the result, you cannot expect the reader to just look at the plot and understand what it means. You need to explain to him why the plot appears as it does, and what is the significance of each and every feature in that plot. That you do in the text. So, the text is the main platform for the message. And sometimes it is also possible that the same information, same output, same result, you try to give through the table, which you explain in the text, and give in a figure also, which also you explain in the same context in the text. Okay? So, this is what is meant by redundancy of information. So, you realize text, tables, figures, which may have sketches as well as plots. Okay? For particularly tricky points, you can consider additional material, some extra plots from some other angle, okay? Some special things which could not get covered in the ordinary figure only. Okay? And whenever a new feature appears, discuss every salient feature carefully, and this has a bearing on this lot of care to select results also. So, typically you try to select results in such a manner that every result that you present illustrates some particular feature, and there is no point in giving the 3 results which illustrate the same feature. Okay? So, whenever a new feature comes with another result, you discuss that salient feature there carefully. However, you should not repeat statements incessantly in the same tone or phraseology. This is another important thing to keep in mind, because in the structure of the technical paper, it does happen that the same thing, the same idea does appear in 4 places. Once in the abstract in some way, once in the introduction, and once inside the main body of the paper where the thing is really appearing, and finally once it will appear in the conclusions at the end. So, in those 4 places, if the same sentence appears or almost the same clause or some sequence of 4 phrases come together one by one, then the reader will lose interest in your paper. And that thing appearing 4 times will not help him in any manner in getting the message better. Rather, explaining that in another tone, through another phraseology, from some other angle, will actually help him in understanding better. For example, you know that if a student is trying to learn something and he gets one lesson on that subject from one teacher, then sometimes it helps if he did not understand that difficult subject properly, then if another teacher explains it to him, it sometimes helps, rather than the same teacher explaining it second time. Okay. Because the other teacher perhaps explains in a different tone, in a different angle. Okay. So, here you are the same 2 teachers, right. So, whenever you get the context once more, you try to explain it or present it in another phraseology from another angle. So, that way whatever he missed in the first round, now he will get better. And you need to spend special efforts on complicated cases, because complicated cases even the expert readers may not get in one shot. Okay. After you have spent all this effort in presenting your results and discussion, and make note again that whatever results you present, you should discuss the details of that result in particular and the relationship among several results that you are presenting together. Okay. Finally, you conclude the paper, and there typically 2 paragraphs appear. Typically, I am telling, there can be exceptions. In one paragraph, you put forth a crisp summary of this particular work, highlighting its contributions, its achievements, and then after that, in brief, you point out what are the next avenues of research that can be explored in this field. Okay. So, this can be enumerated, but need not be. It can be just mentioned in a continuous paragraph also. So, this is the structure of the body of the paper. And before going to the next items which are left after the main body is over, I would like to address any questions that you may have.
So, there must be many possible ways to writing an introduction. So, maybe one would start from motivation, then through literature review, identifying the gaps, and then perhaps connecting with his perspective. But which way, which way it would be best to write an introduction so that you give enough emphasis to the literature that has been already done in that field, and to what you are going to do in the present work. So, how connect best?
Okay. So, in explaining this in more graphic style, I would show you a sketch which one of my senior colleagues did while explaining how a typical technical paper is supposed to be written. So, a typical technical paper, the entire paper is like the flow in a funnel. Okay. So, if you look at the way a funnel is this. Okay. Now, the way if you pour some viscous liquid on it, okay, so you are pouring and it is falling like this, and then like this. So this part of the funnel is your introduction section. Okay. So you have a problem, you have an issue for which you are doing this work, which you are reporting. So the issue comes here. That issue has several aspects. Okay. These aspects which the layman can understand, the layman can visualize from outside. Now, when you put it here, then these aspects, your discussion should go on these aspects, and through the literature review, you come till this point where your particular work reported in this paper becomes the real important, real gap in the human knowledge which is to be addressed. And then the rest of the sections are the journey through this narrow thing which follows a particular line. Okay. By now, you have come to the conclusion. Okay. So the conclusion, this problem with which you set out to work, that problem is solved. Okay. So there is no problem. So through all the issues and aspects that are relevant, you go around them and discuss them in appropriate manner, so that all of them are covered in the context of the existing literature, and then you bring all of that to a head, okay? And that is here, from which point the section 2, 3, 4, 5 continue, and here you get the section N, where you conclude, and that original problem gets solved, and apparently everything is nice in the world. Okay?
So you are saying that a good introduction has nice convergence-like properties.
Exactly.
Something like that. Okay. So yeah. One more question. I mean, you said about this results and discussion. Now, as you said that I might have 28 cases, among them 20 are valid cases. I should have the selectability from those 20 sets and place certain results. But as you mentioned previously in previous lecture, that every research has some assumptions. That means for that particular work, there are some go and not go places. So sometimes is it a good idea from those 8 cases which have not given satisfactory results, if it is important, can we give 1 or 2 results from that to highlight the not go places for this idea?
Yeah, this is a good point. Initially itself, we talked about this idea called delimitation of the scope of your work. That you typically do in order to focus on what this paper is really doing. And in doing that, it also in a way lists out what it is not doing. Okay? And assumptions of the work, typically you should list out properly and explain properly. And that actually is the mechanism by which you delimit the scope of your work. And yes, the out of the 28 cases, 20 are valid, something of that sort. I did not necessarily mean there that 8 are invalid because they were in the outside, they were trying to go outside the assumption. Perhaps it turns out that in those 8 cases, there was too much of background noise, which was later reported, which was later detected, and that is how they became invalid. Okay. In some cases, you find that the beam, the bending of which you were analyzing, that had some extra unacceptable and undesired, unwanted load, which was not detected at the right time, so the results were not valid. So those kinds of things I had in mind. But yes, if some of those results, some of those sets of results are not valid because it was venturing into the arena which are outside your assumptions, based on which the formulation has been made, then of course, as you are telling, you might show that as one possibility where these assumptions, the formulation and the validity of the result are related. Something like that can be done. Sometimes it is done also.
Suppose in optimization or some such cases where number of time taken to execute the algorithm or the number of iterations performed, they are an important aspect of the work and that we have to report. Now, is it really important to give all the hardware details that we have used in the work so as to show that I mean, if the hardware improves, the time taken might be less. I mean, the algorithm efficiency improves in such sense. I mean, how far should we go to report the hardware?
Yes. So, the hardware details of the computer, the system that you are using, needs to be given if you are reporting computational time or CPU time. Okay. And even after you give the CPU time or computational time and you report all the details of the hardware and compare that with other competing results, for a reader it is actually very difficult to figure out what it really means. Okay. People use different ways of giving absolute comparisons. For example, computer science researchers use the sense of how costly a particular algorithm is based on the complexity. Okay. So, but that is also a reasonably abstract notion. In more down to earth situations, for example, the field that you are talking about, optimization or solution of differential equations or numerical integration for that matter, if the method involves those things, then or some other modeling and simulation kind of work. So, typically you report the number of times that thing was evaluated, the evaluation of which depends from one case to another and which is the most costly affair in the entire computation. For example, if you are optimizing a function, then how many times that function is evaluated, that is more important compared to how many additions and subtractions and multiplications and divisions are conducted in executing the steps of the algorithm. Okay. So, then you can compare the results your own computer runs with the computer runs of other authors based on the number of function evaluations. Okay. And if your method is better, then the same accuracy of results, same accuracy and completeness of results you will be able to achieve with less number of function evaluations than others. Then you can claim that yours is better. And if you give the computational cost in that terms, then you do not need to bother about what in which computer you are doing it. Okay?
Thank you, sir.
Okay. So, now we go to the next items in the technical paper. Say after conclusions, this item acknowledgement may be there in a paper or may not be. Now, when it is there or under what conditions it is required, so what should it contain? I mean, both are answered in the same manner, in the same answer. That is, under what situations you need an acknowledgement at the end of the paper, and in the acknowledgements what should go. So, acknowledgements, if it is there, typically is used to express gratitude to any organization for financial support or logistic support, use of any facility for the work. For example, some particular experimental facility which you needed to collect the data, if you had to use the facility which is available, then you need to acknowledge that facility. If from some grant you got the funds to carry out this particular research, then you should acknowledge their contribution, their grant. Okay? And acknowledgements are often also given to those scholars who helped in the intellectual development of the work. So, the intellectual development of the work may be technical in nature, may be editorial in nature. Okay? So, technical, for example, you are handling the problem and some particular scholar gave you some tips on how to handle it better or how to crack one important issue without which you were unable to make progress. So, you acknowledge that particular help, that particular idea. Sometimes you also acknowledge another scholar for his editorial input. He helped by his suggestions, by his advice to improve the editorial quality of the paper. So, that also is possible. So, whenever such inputs, such advice is significant, you should acknowledge it. Of course, if the discussion, if the consultation is much more than what can be handled by acknowledgement only, then he might be a co-author for that matter. But if the contribution is less than what would make him a co-author, but significant still, then you acknowledge it. Sometimes the editorial inputs or even technical inputs come from the anonymous reviewer also. For example, it is possible that the reviewer accepted your paper, but along with that he suggested some important major revisions technically or editorially, and after making those revisions, you yourself found that the quality of the paper has improved. So, you can acknowledge him also. Okay. Now, I said that acknowledgement is not a necessary aspect, not a necessary element of a paper. The next one, references, is a necessary element of a technical paper. Why, you will ask? Because of something which we have already discussed, that today no research is done in a vacuum. So, whatever you are doing today, you have been led to this particular research theme through some background, that is, human beings have already found some knowledge in the field through which you got motivated, in which you have found gaps which you are trying to address through this particular work. So, that background is actually covered in the references. So, which in the body you have cited, most of them in your section 1 and some of them later also here and there. And now, at the end you provide a list of references with appropriate details of which journal, which year, which issue, which pages and so on, and of course, the title and author. Now, references is essential in a technical paper, and you need to list all kinds of references, papers, reports, books, thesis dissertations, sometimes patents also, and nowadays perhaps websites also, from wherever you got information. Okay? And this has to be done in the bibliography style that that particular journal or conference requires. Okay? They have different bibliography styles. And while listing out the references, sometimes you will have some difficulty in deciding whether a particular paper should be included or not. So, typically that confusion should not arise. If it is relevant to your work, then you include. If the connection is far-fetched, then you typically do not include that. But whenever you really have a confusion that it is related but not so well, so should I include it, should I not? If you have to think it twice, then typically it is better to include it. And whatever is put in the list of references at the end of the paper, somewhere or the other inside the body of the paper, it must be cited. So, some reference cannot just hang here in the list without a citation inside. Something that can happen in the case of a bibliography of a book, but not in the references of a technical paper. Okay. Now, after references, you have another item which is optional, which may be there in a paper, need not be, and that is appendix. So, there may be a paper which does not have any appendix, which is perfectly all right. Now, sometimes it happens that a few things turn up which you cannot put anywhere properly. Okay. So, such things are typically put in the appendix with a little reference in the body in the appropriate place. So, appendix also has a title, and if the sections were numbered as 1, 2, 3, 4, then the appendices are typically numbered as A, B, C and so on. So, when you start appendix, that is appendices, then you say A, then the title of this appendix. So, as I told you, appendix in a paper or even a thesis or a book is actually not necessary, but quite often it is there. So, whether to give an appendix or not, and if we give, then what to go inside it, that is a matter of the author's judgment. Okay? and of course, there may be one or more appendices. Now, what typically goes in an appendix? When you are writing something, now in that context, something appears in your mind which is not part of the main narrative, but you sometimes like to give that information. Okay. So, sometimes you put that little thing in the parenthesis. Okay. Now, if the thing is not little, then for example, if in one line you start the opening parenthesis and the things inside the parenthesis go for several lines, okay, 3 lines, and then the sentence, then the parenthesis closes and the sentence ends. The sentence itself perhaps had 7 words, and the thing which is going inside the parenthesis, that is something like 17 words or 27 words, that is certainly not a good idea. Okay. So, in that case, you put a footnote. Okay. Sometimes even 3 words can be put in a footnote. Okay. So, these are different ways of giving information to the reader without spending your space for that particular purpose. So, one is citing some other work and giving him the reference where the reader may look up for more details. The second possibility is put something inside the parenthesis. The third possibility is to put it in the footnote, but if it is too big for a footnote and you feel that it must be given to the reader in some way or the other, then it goes to the appendix, and in such a situation you must have that appendix. So, what kind of things typically go in an appendix? Detailed data, input data of your result, or for that matter sometimes output data, which cannot be skipped altogether, okay, because that will be lack of information. But if you put it in the body of the paper itself where its context came, then it would damage the continuity of the exposition. So, you can make a reference to appendix A or appendix B in that context and say that this set of data is given in this particular appendix, okay, and put the entire data in the appendix. This is one kind of thing. Some necessary background, some background concept which it would be nice if the reader already had, but you suspect that your reader may not know that thing or may not have that necessary background, and you have to cover it in some way or the other. However, you do not want, for whatever reason, to direct him to a textbook where he can get this information over say 7 pages. You do not want to distract your reader for 7 pages of another book. Rather, you feel that whatever is necessary for him to appreciate your work can be rather given in a concise manner within 1 page. That 1 page perhaps you do not want to put in one of your sections, because that is not your contribution, that is not the contribution of this particular paper. So, you can put that little background information in the appendix and make a reference in the body of your paper. So, some necessary background which is not a contribution of the present paper. Then sometimes in order to solve your problem, you are using some standard method, which is also something like a necessary background which the reader must have, and reader will perhaps not appreciate your work at all if he does not know this method, and all through your work you are making references to that method. Not only that, the way that method appears in the typical textbooks, from that you have made a different kind of formalism, you have used a different kind of formalism, a different kind of notation in which you are giving out your details of the paper. So, in your notation you want to give a brief outline of that method. So, such a brief outline of this method you might put in an appendix, so as to ensure that the reader has ready material, brief, concise and crisp, from which he can pick up the basic background of that method to follow the rest of your exposition. Okay. Now, this also you could not put in the main body of the paper typically, because this is not the contribution of this particular paper. Sometimes you have listed out an algorithm, a methodology, but then you feel that giving a flowchart also would help for more information, more redundancy of information. But then you do not want to break the narrative of the paper, you do not want to damage the flow. So, you can say that a flowchart of this same algorithm has been given in appendix C or whatever it is. Okay? Some flowchart, some sideways elaboration, some extra detail which is too large for a sensible footnote or proper coverage in the body of the paper itself, that kind of a thing you put in the appendix. And just like sections, appendices also are broken according to subject requirement. For every individual item, there is one appendix. So, this completes our discussion about the typical structural layout of a technical paper. Now, if there are any questions from anywhere of this entire lecture, please ask.
While citing the references in the body of the paper, I mean, is it a must to go sequentially? I mean, or which number order to follow? I mean, sometimes we understand that yes, I mean, proper sequential order should be followed, but some people give a context-wise citation and there is no numerical sequence followed. So, which way is a better way to go, and what is your suggestion on that?
Typically, there are two issues hidden in this. One is the issue of order of the references in the list at the end and their order of coverage in the body of the paper. Okay. Now, this is partly decided by the bibliography style. So, if the bibliography style numbers them, then actually the order is based on the first citation. Okay. So, in the body of the paper, whichever is the work cited first, that should appear as item 1 in the list of references. Okay. And if you are using BibTeX, then you do not have to do anything actively to achieve that, that will automatically happen. Okay. And this numbered list of references that way has this advantage. Okay. On the other hand, those bibliography styles which use author and year, they are more complicated. Okay. So, and there typically numbers do not come. Okay. So, there the citation is by author year, or author means the last name of the author. If there are two authors, then last name of the first author and last name of the second author. If there are three authors, then the last name of the first author et al. Okay, and year. This is a little troublesome, because if the same set of authors published 3 papers in 2012, then it becomes a little murky, because then you cite them as Sharma and Beg 2012A, Sharma and Beg 2012B, and Sharma and Beg 2012C, and that is trouble. Okay. But I cannot tell you that prefer only those journals which have the numbered list of references. So, that cannot be done. So, this is one aspect of this discussion. Another is in which order we should do the literature review, in which order it should come. And make note that citations and references come not only from the literature review, from the other sections of the paper also they might appear in different contexts. But so far as literature review is concerned, so there all sorts of possibilities are there, and the details are typically left to the judgment of the authors, and quite often people cover similar works and works on one particular aspect of the entire literature review together, and among them they typically follow the chronological order. I mean, that is one thing which is quite often used. Okay. But that is perhaps not the original question, because that is a completely different theme. Okay. Okay. So, thank you.